Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English story. I remember the first time I pushed myself to the edge. Not the kind of edge where you teeter on the brink of something exciting, like jumping into a cold lake on a summer day, but the kind where you feel the ground crumbling beneath you, and you're not sure if you're flying or falling. It was 2 a.m., and I was hunched over my desk, the glow of my laptop casting long shadows on the walls. My eyes burned, my back ached, and my hands trembled as I typed furiously, trying to finish a project that was due in 6 hours. I hadn't slept in 2 days. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in just as long. My body was screaming at me to stop, but my mind was louder. It kept saying, "You're not enough. You have to prove them wrong. You have to prove yourself wrong." That was the beginning of my toxic relationship with motivation. It wasn't the healthy kind, the kind that whispers, "You can do this," and leaves you feeling empowered. No, this was the kind that shouts, "You're worthless if you don't do this," and leaves you hollow. It was a voice that didn't belong to me. Not really. It was a patchwork of expectations: my parents, my teachers, my bosses, societies, all stitched together into a monster that lived in my head. And I fed it. I fed it with late nights and skipped meals and broken relationships. I fed it with every yes when I wanted to say no, every "I'm fine" when I was drowning. For a while, it worked. I was the golden child, the overachiever, the one who always went the extra mile. I got the promotions, the accolades, the nods of approval. But the higher I climbed, the emptier I felt. The monster was never satisfied. It always wanted more. And so did I. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Isn't it always a Tuesday? The most ordinary of days. The kind that slips by unnoticed until it doesn't. I was in a meeting, presenting a project I'd pour my soul into. My boss interrupted me mid-sentence. "Is this the best you can do?" She asked. Her tone sharp, her eyes sharper. I froze. The room felt like it was spinning, and I could hear the monster in my head laughing. "See? You're not enough. You'll never be enough." I don't remember what I said after that. I don't remember how I got home. What I do remember is standing in my bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my skin pale, my hair a tangled mess. I looked like a stranger. No, worse, I looked like a ghost. And I thought, is this what it means to push yourself? To become a shell of a person? To sacrifice everything that makes you alive? That night, I didn't work. I didn't answer emails. I didn't even open my laptop. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, and cried. I cried for the person I used to be, the one who laughed easily and dreamed wildly. I cried for the person I had become, the one who measured her worth in productivity and perfection. And then, when there were no tears left, I made a decision. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep feeding the monster. The journey to reclaim myself was messy. It wasn't a straight line or a montage set to an inspiring soundtrack. It was slow and painful, like pulling shards of glass from my skin. I started small. I said no to a project I didn't have the bandwidth for. I took a day off just because. I called a friend I hadn't spoken to in months and admitted I wasn't okay. Each step felt like a betrayal of everything I'd been taught, everything I believed. But with every no, every moment of rest, every honest conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. It wasn't easy. The monster didn't go quietly. It screamed and thrashed and tried to convince me I was failing. But I learned to quiet it, not by feeding it, but by listening to it. I realized the monster wasn't my enemy. It was a part of me, a wounded part that had been trying to protect me in the only way it knew how. It didn't need to be silenced. It needed to be healed. There's a moment I'll never forget. It was a year after that breaking point Tuesday, and I was hiking in the mountains. The trail was steep, and my legs burned with every step. But this time, it was different. I wasn't pushing myself to prove anything. I wasn't running from something or towards something. I was just moving, breathing, being. And when I reached the summit, I sat on a rock and looked out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having all the answers or achieving all the goals. It was the kind that comes from knowing you're enough, just as you are. It was the kind that comes from realizing that pushing yourself doesn't have to mean breaking yourself. That you can strive and grow and dream without sacrificing your soul. Now, when I think about motivation, I see it as a spectrum. On one end, there's the toxic kind, the kind that demands and destroys. On the other, there's the genuine kind, the kind that inspires and uplifts. And in between, there's a thousand shades of gray. I've learned to navigate that spectrum, to recognize when I'm slipping into old patterns and when I'm moving towards something true. It's not perfect. Some days, the monster still whispers. Some days, I still push too hard. But now, I know how to come back to myself. I know how to rest, how to ask for help, how to say no. And I know this. Pushing yourself isn't about proving your worth. It's about discovering it. It's about finding the balance between striving and surrendering, between ambition and acceptance. It's about learning that you're not defined by what you achieve, but by how you live, by how you love, by how you rise after you fall. This is my story. It's messy and imperfect, just like me, just like life, but it's mine. And if there's one thing I hope you take from it, it's this: you are enough. Not because of what you do or what you achieve, but because of who you are. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop pushing and just be. Moral of the story: the story's moral is that true growth and self worth come from balance, not from relentless self destruction. Pushing yourself can be a powerful force, but it must come from a place of self love and genuine inspiration, not from the toxic need to prove your worth. The narrator's journey teaches us that healing and success are not mutually exclusive. You can strive for greatness without sacrificing your humanity. The real measure of strength is not how much you can endure, but how well you can listen to yourself, honor your limits, and rise with compassion. Part 2: The Unfolding. The mountains became my sanctuary after that day. Not because they were grand or awe-inspiring, though they were, but because they taught me how to move without rushing, how to climb without conquering, how to exist without demanding more of myself than I could give. But life, as it always does, had more lessons in store for me. Lessons I didn't know I needed. It started with a phone call. My younger sister, Mia, her voice trembling on the other end. "I need help," she said, just like that. No preamble, no small talk, just a raw, unfiltered admission of vulnerability. I hadn't heard her sound like that since we were kids, when she'd crawl into my bed after a nightmare. My first instinct was to fix it, to jump into action, to make a plan, to do something. But then I remember the mountains. I remembered how to breathe. "Tell me what's going on," I said, and I listened. Mia had been pushing herself, too. Not in the same way I had, but in a way that was just as destructive. She was a single mom, working 2 jobs, trying to finish her degree, and raising a spirited 6-year-old who had more energy than the sun. She was running on fumes, and she didn't know how to stop. "I feel like I'm failing at everything," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough." Hearing her say those words was like looking into a mirror. I saw myself in her, the exhaustion, the self-doubt, the relentless pressure to be everything for everyone. And I realized something. The monster I've been fighting wasn't just mine. It was ours. It was everywhere. In the quiet desperation of my sister's voice, in the hollow eyes of my coworkers, in the endless scroll of social media where everyone seemed to be thriving except me. It was a cultural sickness, a collective belief that our value was tied to our output. And I didn't want it for her. I didn't want it for anyone. I invited Mia and her son, Lau, to stay with me for a while. It wasn't a solution. Not really, but it was a start. I cleared out my spare room, stocked the fridge with their favorite foods, and tried to create a space where she could breathe, where she could rest, where she could remember who she was beyond the role she played. At first, it was hard. Mia was so used to pushing herself that slowing down felt like failure. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. to clean my already clean apartment, or she'd insist on cooking elaborate meals even when I told her to order takeout. I don't want to be a burden, she'd say, her voice tight with anxiety. And I'd tell her, you're not a burden. You're my sister. Let me help you. It wasn't just about her, though. It was about me, too. Having her there forced me to confront my own patterns, my own fears. I'd spent so long trying to prove my worth through achievement that I didn't know how to just be with someone, how to sit with their pain without trying to fix it, how to offer support without taking on their struggles as my own. It was uncomfortable, messy, and beautiful all at once. One night, after Leo was asleep, Mia and I stayed up talking. We sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by half-empty mugs of tea and the soft glow of a single lamp. She told me about her dreams, the ones she'd put on hold when she became a mom, the one she was afraid to admit she still wanted. And I told her about my journey, about the monster in my head and the mountains that had saved me. We cried. We laughed. We sat in silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt connected, not just to her, but to myself. Mia and Leo stayed with me for 3 months. During that time, we didn't solve all her problems. We didn't have to. What we did was create a space where she could begin to heal, where she could remember that she was more than her struggles, more than her to-do list, where she could see herself through my eyes, not as a failure, but as a fighter, as a survivor, as someone worthy of love and rest and joy. When she left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for showing me how to stop pushing." And I whispered back, "Thank you for reminding me why it's worth it." The deeper truth, the story doesn't end there. Because life doesn't end. There's still days when the monster whispers, when the pressure feels unbearable, when the world demands more than I can give. But now, I know how to come back to myself. I know how to listen to the quiet voice beneath the noise. The one that says, "You are enough. You always have been." And I know this, too. Pushing yourself isn't just about climbing mountains or achieving goals. It's about showing up for yourself, for the people you love, for the life you want to live. It's about finding the courage to rest when you need to ask for help when you're struggling, to say no when the cost is too high. It's about learning that you don't have to break yourself to be whole. So here's my question for you. What are you pushing for? And who are you becoming in the process? Because the truth is, you don't have to earn your worth. You don't have to prove your value. You just have to live fully, deeply, authentically. And sometimes, that's the hardest thing of all, the ripple effect. Life has a way of circling back to the same lessons, doesn't it? Just when you think you've figured it out, it throws you a curveball, forcing you to relearn what you thought you already knew. For me, that curveball came in the form of a job offer, a big one. The kind of opportunity that would have made the old me drop everything and dive head first into the grind. But the new me hesitated. The offer came from a former colleague, someone I respected deeply. She was launching a startup, and she wanted me to be her right hand. You're the only person I trust to do this, she said, her voice brimming with excitement. This could be huge for both of us, and it could have been. The role was everything I'd once dreamed of: creative freedom, a chance to build something from the ground up, a salary that would have made my bank account sing. But as I listened to her pitch, I felt something I hadn't expected: dread. It wasn't the work itself. I love the work. It was the cost, the late nights, the missed birthdays, the constant pressure to perform, the voice in my head that would inevitably start whispering, "You're not doing enough. You're not good enough." I'd spent years untangling myself from that voice, and I wasn't sure I was ready to invite it back in. I told her I needed time to think. She was surprised, maybe even a little offended, but she agreed. And so, I did something I'd never done before. I sat with the decision. I didn't make a pros and cons list. I didn't ask for advice. I just sat. I let myself feel the weight of it, the excitement and the fear, the possibility and the risk. And then I did something even more radical. I asked myself what I wanted, not what I thought I should want, not what other people expected me to want, but what I, deep down, truly wanted. The answer surprised me. I didn't want the job, not because it wasn't a great opportunity, but because it wasn't the right opportunity, not for me. Not right now. What I wanted was balance. I wanted time to write, to hike, to spend lazy Sundays with my friends. I wanted to be there for Mia and Leo as they navigated their new life. I wanted to live, not just work. When I called my colleague to decline, I braced myself for disappointment. But instead, she surprised me. "I get it," she said. "I really do. And honestly, I admire you for knowing your limits. That's something I'm still trying to figure out." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. They reminded me that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about the ripple effect. by choosing myself, by honoring my boundaries. I was giving others permission to do the same. Not long after that, Mia called me with news. She decided to go back to school part-time instead of full-time, so she could spend more time with Leo. I realized I don't have to do it all at once. She said, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in years. I can take my time. I can enjoy the process. Hearing her say those words felt like a victory, not just for her, but for both of us. It was proof that we were breaking the cycle, that we were learning how to push ourselves in ways that didn't break us. The unexpected twist. But life, as always, had one more lesson in store. A few months after I turned down the job offer, I got a call from my dad. He'd been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. My dad, the man who'd always been my rock, my cheerleader, my safe place, was facing something he couldn't control. And for the first time in my life, I saw him as vulnerable. I flew home to be with him, and we spent a week together, just the two of us. We talked about everything: his diagnosis, his fears, his regrets. And then, one night, he said something that changed everything. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice steady but soft. "Not because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've become. You've learned how to take care of yourself." That's something I never figured out. His words stayed with me long after I returned home. They reminded me that the journey I was on wasn't just about me. It was about the people who came before me and the ones who would come after. It was about breaking generational patterns, about creating a new way of being. And it was about love, not the kind that demands sacrifice, but the kind that asks for presence. The final revelation. Now, when I think about pushing myself, I see it differently. It's not about climbing higher or running faster. It's about digging deeper. It's about showing up for the people I love, for the work that matters to me, for the life I want to live. It's about knowing when to push and when to rest, when to fight and when to surrender. It's about understanding that my worth isn't tied to my achievements. It's tied to my humanity. And here's the thing. The monster hasn't gone away. It's still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. But now, I know how to face it. I know how to say, "I see you, but you don't control me." I know how to choose myself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So, if you're out there, pushing yourself to the brink, I want you to know this. You don't have to break yourself to be enough. You don't have to prove your worth. You are enough, just as you are. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop pushing and just be. The years that followed were a tapestry of small, quiet moments that wove together into something profound. My dad's diagnosis became a catalyst for change, not just for him, but for our entire family. We started having conversations we'd avoided for decades. We laugh more. We hug more. We said, I love you more. And in those moments, I realized something. The legacy we leave isn't measured by our achievements or our accolades. It's measured by the love we give and the connections we nurture. Mia graduated from school, not with fanfare, but with a quiet pride that radiated from her like sunlight. She didn't throw a big party or post a lengthy caption on social media. Instead, she invited me and Leo over for dinner, and we celebrated with homemade pizza and a chocolate cake that leaned slightly to one side. As we sat around her small kitchen table, laughing and telling stories, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for her resilience, for her courage, for the way she'd shown me that it's possible to rebuild a life from the ashes. Leo, now a spirited 9-year-old with a knack for asking impossible questions, looked at Mia and said, Mom, are you proud of yourself? Mia's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. Yeah, buddy, she said, I am. And in that moment, I saw the ripple effect of her choices, the way her courage was shaping Leo's understanding of what it means to be strong, to be human. As for me, I found a rhythm that worked. I took on freelance projects that excited me, but I also made time for the things that filled my soul: writing, hiking, spending time with the people I loved. I didn't have it all figured out, and that was okay. What I had was enough. What I was enough. The unexpected gift. One day, I received an email from a woman I'd never met. She'd read an essay I'd written about my journey, about the monster, the mountains, the moments of reckoning, and she wanted to thank me. Your story helped me see that I'm not alone, she wrote. It gave me the courage to start my own journey. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that our stories have power, that by sharing our struggles, we can light the way for others. The moral of the story. The moral of this story is that true strength lies in balance, self-compassion, and the courage to redefine success. Pushing yourself isn't about breaking your limits. It's about understanding them. It's about knowing when to strive and when to rest, when to fight and when to surrender. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't tied to your productivity or your achievements. It's inherent, unshakable, and unchanging. The journey isn't linear. There will be moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments when a monster whispers in your ear. But there will also be moments of clarity, moments of connection, moments of profound peace. And in those moments, you'll realize that the greatest act of courage isn't pushing yourself to the brink. It's choosing yourself. Again and again. The final reflection. If there's one thing I hope you take from this story, it's this: you are enough. Not because of what you do or what you achieve, but because of who you are. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop pushing and just be, to rest, to breathe, to live. Because in the end, that's what it's all about, not the heights you reach, but the life you build along the way. And that life, with all its messiness and beauty, is more than enough. Part 5. The circle closes. Years have a way of folding into one another, like the pages of a well-loved book. The edges soften, the corners curl, and the story becomes something you carry with you, not just something you read. For me, the story of pushing myself, of breaking and rebuilding, of learning and unlearning has become a part of who I am. It's not something I've outgrown or moved past. It's something I return to again and again, like a favorite song or a familiar trail. One autumn afternoon, I found myself back in the mountains. Not the same ones where I'd had my revelation years ago, but a different range. One with jagged peaks and golden aspens that shimmered in the sunlight. I was hiking with Leo, now a lanky 12-year-old with a curiosity that matched his energy. He'd begged me to take him on a real adventure, and I'd agreed, partly because I wanted to share something I loved with him, and partly because I wanted to see the mountains through his eyes. As we climbed, Leo chattered nonstop, asking questions about everything from the geology of the rocks to the names of the trees. At one point, he stopped abruptly and turned to me. "Auntie," he said, "why do you like hiking so much? Isn't it just like walking but harder?" I laughed, partly at the question and partly at the way he'd nailed it. "It's not just about the walking," I said. "It's about the journey, about pushing yourself, but not too hard, about knowing when to stop and when to keep going, and about the view at the top. It's always worth it." He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, and then bounded ahead, leaving me to follow. Watching him, I felt a surge of gratitude for his energy, his curiosity, his unshakable belief that the world was full of wonder. And I realized something. The lessons I'd learned, the battles I'd fought, they weren't just for me. They were for him, too. For Mia, for everyone I loved, for everyone who might one day need to hear that it's okay to rest, to stumble, to be human. When we reached the summit, Leo let out a whoop of joy and ran to the edge. His arms spread wide as if he could hug the sky. I stood back, watching him, and felt a lump rise in my throat. This was it. I realized. This was the legacy I wanted to leave, not a list of achievements or a bank account full of zeros. But moments like this, moments of connection, of joy, of presence, the unexpected twist. Later that evening, as we sat around a campfire roasting marshmallows, Leo asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Auntie," he said, "do you ever feel like you're not good enough?" The question hung in the air, heavy and raw, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Then I took a deep breath and said, Yeah, buddy, I do. Sometimes a lot. He nodded, his face serious. Me too, he said. But Mom says it's okay to feel that way. She says it doesn't mean it's true. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I reached over to ruffle his hair. Your mom's pretty smart. Huh? He grinned. Yeah, but don't tell her I said that. We both laughed. And in that moment, I felt the circle close. The lessons I'd learned, the battles I'd fought, they weren't just mine anymore. They were his, too. And someday, they'd be someone else's. That's how it works. I realized. We pass on what we've learned, not through lectures or lessons, but through moments of honesty, of vulnerability, of love. The final moral, the moral of this story, the one that ties it all together, is this. Life isn't about how hard you push or how high you climb. It's about how deeply you love, how fully you live, and how honestly you share your journey with others. The monster in your head, the one that whispers you're not enough, will always be there. But so will the quiet voice beneath it, the one that reminds you of your worth, your humanity, your light. And in the end, that's what matters, not the heights you reach, but the love you give, the connections you nurture, the moments you create. Because those are the things that linger. Long after the noise fades and the dust settles. Those are the things that make life worth living. So, if you're out there, pushing yourself to the brink, I want you to know this. You are enough. You always have been. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stop pushing and just be, to rest, to breathe, to live. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.